Yes, you got to be an enabler, and you can't just say no. And I think new CISOs especially, you got this authority, you got this hammer, and now you want to go and run around the room looking for flies you can smash, and you can break a lot of windows that way.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Dan Lohrmann, Chief Security Officer at Security Mentor Incorporated, and the first CISO for the state of Michigan, which was the first state CISO.
Well, I started my career at the National Security Agency, and my brother told me, actually in college, majored in computer science, I got my master's in computer science, and my brothers told me, computers are going to be hot, get in that space. He was very successful. He actually was a salesman. He sold for like 10 different companies and did a great job throughout his career. He just retired, but really just at NSA, it's kind of, security is our middle name. And so I was doing global networks with NSA, actually in the intelligence community for 14 years. And so security was part of everything we did, obviously, encryption, et cetera. I won't go into the details of that, but just a lot of interest in that space. And then we can talk about my years in Michigan government, but I was probably I was the NSA guy, right? And so when things got consolidated in Michigan, and we did a major government reorg and created the first CISO in Michigan, actually first CISO in all 50 state governments. I was appointed to that role in 2002.
Oh, so you were the first CISO
for state governments, for actually in Michigan, but also statewide, as far as all 50 state governments. Now, there may have been others in the private sector, certainly others in federal government or whatever. But yeah, in state government, we were first. And Michigan really did a major consolidation in 2002. 7 years as CISO. Then I went over to be CTO for 3 years. And Chief Technology Officer. So size of Michigan was like 50,000 state employees. So I had like 800 staff, 400 contractors. We ran all the infrastructure for them. And then under Governor Rick Snyder in 2011, I went back and became the CSO. Now, what's the difference? A Chief Security Officer, but it was over physical and cybersecurity. So I had about 300 staff, 40 or so in cybersecurity, but then we had all the guards, we did all the monitoring, all of the cameras and the badges and parking lots and all the rest of it. So we had all the physical security for state government.
Sure. And how did you find the state governments different from other security programs?
Yeah, no, I mean it changed a lot. When I first joined state government in the late 90s. I joked it was all about Y2K and there was no security. I mean, it was kind of, I was the CIO for management and budget from 97 to 2000. Then I went over to Michigan before I became CISO in 2002. And we joked that, that it was night and day from NSA. I mean, in NSA, I'd been in England for 7 years with Lockheed and Mantech as an NSA contractor started actually as a Green Badge or a government employee for 6 years. And then I was in the private sector. And it was barbed wire fences and Uzi submachine guns, and it was real, NSA security. It took it very seriously, and the Gulf War and all of that, and it was very, very, kind of one extreme. State government at the time in the late 90s, there was like no security. I mean, it was not just physically in the buildings, you could just walk right in. Tell a little funny story. It's kind of first day on the job, there's signs up all over the walls, and even in the restrooms, like, watch your purse, watch your purse. Even people are like, what's that? What are all these signs up there for? And it's like literally, it's like, well, some people had walked in the building, we're walking in the cubes, we're taking women's purses and walking out. I mean, that was the security. It's like
the solution was to put up a sign.
But like that, it was unbelievable, and that was really, there was like no security, and people used to laugh at me when I talked about passwords and screensavers and things, because it was literally, it just was not effective any level. And they're like, we're not NSA now, are we? And they would kind of mock me. But that was through Y2K. It really changed. The pendulum swung, Todd, after 9/11. I mean, 9/11 changed, even though it didn't hit Michigan, across government. And we had done a lot of, building Michigan.gov, building e-government, online and not inline, renewing your driver's licenses, campground reservations, all the different things, and, health records, all these things. And there was a sense, wow, we got to protect these. And you may say 9/11 was a physical attack against, of course, New York and Washington and the nation, but people woke up to it. And it really did swing. Pendulum swung pretty hard, and that's we got a lot of resources. So it was a real 180-degree turn from, say, 97 to like 2002 when I became CISO.
So how did you get those extra resources in your program? Because you were really starting from pretty much nothing, right?
Exactly, we did. And in Michigan, we did a major consolidation. So it was interesting, when we first formed our group, it was very much, 20 different agencies, and then we created one Department of Information Technology. And so I got kind of a grab bag of security people, kind of a hodgepodge from all these different agencies that now came together and were doing, cybersecurity, and really had to start from scratch. So yeah, we had to, but because of 9/11, and because we had a consolidated now authority, executive order from the governor, there was a new sense of urgency there. And, I was the guy who'd come from NSA, had the background. I had managed large groups, prior to that. So, I mean, at that time, there were a lot of federal grants. Michigan was really in a recession. So we didn't have much money. I mean, we kind of didn't come out of a recession for a decade from like 2001 to 2010, while the rest of the country kind of bounced back. We didn't. But we got a lot of FEMA grants. We got a lot of federal grants. And we had a lot of, the fact that we were consolidated, and the fact that we had the authority and the executive order, and a lot of agencies. It was funny, while we didn't have a lot of money, what we did have was we had a lot of agencies that knew they needed help. So we didn't have a lot of turf battles. People were like buying to hand over the reins, if you will, which was nice. It kind of tore down some of the traditional stovepipes of people like, don't control my business area kind of stuff.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, available at Amazon.com and other booksellers.
So you wrote a great piece in the CISO Compass book about business enablement. And you gave some great examples in there. Do you want to expand on those?
Sure.
I loved your Wi-Fi story.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been a funny career. I tell the story that I almost got fired as a CISO, and Terry Takai became our CIO under Governor Granholm, who's now, people see her a lot on CNN. She's a commentator, on a lot of Democratic, the primaries and everything going on right now. But Jennifer Granholm became governor. Terry Takai became our CIO. She went on, by the way, to become CIO in California later, and then CIO for the U.S. Department of Defense. So very, very accomplished. And early on, it's kind of like there was kind of everyone's heard the phrase, forming, storming, performing, and norming, or norming then performing maybe. But early days.
I actually have those words in the book. It actually talks about these four phases.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, this was the storming phase. So early on, Terry. This was probably 6 months into when Terry had come. I had been CISO for a little bit over a year, but Terry came on, and she had this vision at the time, we're going to put Wi-Fi in all of our state government conference rooms. Now today, in 2020, that seems so obvious. It's like, sure, of course, Wi-Fi. McDonald's has got Wi-Fi, your hotel's got Wi-Fi, everyone's got Wi-Fi. But at the time, it was like, well, it's really very unsecure. Some people say it's still unsecure today, but I mean, very unsecure. You know, people were war driving around, just like literally getting into, there were stories in the papers about, you know, people getting into cash registers at Home Depot and Lowe's.
Best Buy, I think.
Sitting in the parking lots and all the rest of it. I mean, it was, you know, it was bad. And I, you know, because I'm the NSA guy and I'm the straight CISO, and I had all these white papers. I had done my homework, you know, and I, you know, bad idea, don't do Wi-Fi, you know, not secure, you know, was shutting this puppy down. So anyway, Terry gave me this task, and we had a staff meeting. It was about 10 of us around a big table, and about, I think it was agenda item 4. And we got to like 20 minutes into this 1 hour staff meeting. And she said, Dan, okay, please tell us how we're going to put Wi-Fi in all these conference rooms. You know, all the different, you know, the CTO was there and the head of application development and all the different players in this agency. And I said, well, Terry, and I handed out sheets of paper, and I had, you know, a stack of white papers from NSA, CIA, DIA, FBI, one, you know, bad, you know, headlines. I was ready. I was ready to go to battle. And what happened was, I said, so Terry, we can't do this project. I'm canceling this project. You know, basically, this is a bad idea. And I handed out these sheets of paper with my summary talking points, and I had all my backups. And Terry basically said to me, she just looked at me, you could cut the air with a knife with the silence. And she said, I want everyone to leave the room but Dan. And I've never seen a government conference room empty so fast. I mean, they just ran out of the room. It was unbelievable. And I'm sitting there with Terry Takai, who, by the way, is a good friend now. So kind of give a tip on where the story's going to end. But you know, I just had breakfast with her this morning. But interesting, she said to me, Dan, if that's your answer, you can't be the CISO in Michigan. And I was just stunned. I mean, I just shocked. And I looked at her like she was a ghost. And I said, well, Terry, let me explain. She said, no, stop. She said, I know you know your stuff. Everyone knows you're from NSA. You got a master's in computer science. You're a smart guy. We're not questioning that. Everyone knows the reasons why you're saying this. I know why you're saying it. I read those articles. I read your emails. But let me tell you something. She said, I've been to Dow, Ford, Chrysler, and GM, and they all have Wi-Fi in their conference rooms. They know something you don't know. Now, I'm giving you 1 week to figure this out. And she said, I'm not saying get it done in a week, but I want you to come back in 1 week with a plan on how we're going to do this, or I want your resignation. Now that was a shock.
Career defining.
Oh, it was a career. It was of course I wanted to keep my job, but beyond not getting fired, it just really shocked me. And you know, my team, I remember going back to the office, and everyone's like, yeah, did you tell them we're canceling the project? And they're all like, they didn't have signs up, but they almost did. They're like, yeah, you know, almost like a pep rally. And I'm like, guys, you know, everyone in the conference room, you know, we're not doing this, guys. And I basically laid it down and said, we're going to call these people up. We're going to call Dow, Ford, Chrysler, GM. We're going to figure out how they did it. We're going to learn from them, and we're going to roll this out. So long story short, we did put together a plan. 2 years later, we win the award from NASCIO, the National Association of State CIOs, for the top Wi-Fi program in government nationwide. I mean, but the bigger lesson for me was you can't just say no. You can't just, you know, cancel the project. You got to get to yes. And it can be a yes, but, or a yes and, hopefully not a but, because a but can cancel out the rest of it. But the and is, you know, offer alternatives, look at options. You know, you're probably, state of Michigan wasn't the first one doing Wi-Fi in the world. You know, we weren't, you know, generally speaking in state government, like we talked about earlier, you know, maybe if you're in, you know, NSA or CIA, you're doing, you know, bleeding edge stuff, but this wasn't bleeding edge. I mean, and there were ways to secure it. I mean, was it perfect? No. But, you know, we
did they have some things that, you know, you weren't seeing in the white papers or something?
Oh, they did. They put in some technologies. The good news was I had Terry's support to go do some of the things that they were doing. Like, you know, they were looking at Ethernet addresses. They were doing MAC address. You know, they were mapping things to devices, and they were doing authentication. There were ways that they, you know, even now people may say, well, there were later versions that things weren't as secure maybe as you wanted, but there were ways to stop war driving for sure. You know, people weren't driving up and, you know, getting into our conference rooms off the streets in Lansing. But certainly they were doing things that we did not know about. And there was stuff that I learned. I think the bigger lesson I learned was not so much just about Wi-Fi, but it's really the bigger lesson for me was, yes, you got to be an enabler, and you can't just say no. And I think new CISOs especially, you got this authority, you got this hammer, and now you want to go and run around the room looking for flies you can smash, and you can break a lot of windows that way, And
you also found out other companies that were doing something that you wanted to do, which was counter to a lot of what the white papers, or if you do the internet searches,
correct,
and all the research that was done, somebody was figuring that out somewhere.
Correct. And going out and looking for those best practices. And I think CISOs and security pros in general, if you're looking for a certain, how to shut down a Wi-Fi project, that's one search, right? It's very different than maybe, how can we securely enable a Wi-Fi project? Or again, Wi-Fi, the thing is, it's not just a Wi-Fi question.
Yeah.
To me, I've written blogs, Todd, you and I have communicated over the years, and it could, you could swap out the word Wi-Fi for BYOD, right. Bring your own device. You could talk about IoT, and it's amazing how many articles you read, whatever the hottest, latest thing is. Now we're saying AI is the latest, AI and autonomous vehicles. And look, there's going to be, are autonomous vehicles going to get hacked? Sure. Is IoT getting hacked? Sure. But if you're just the guy who's like, I'm out to shut down every IoT project in the world, you're not going to last long in the CISO community. I mean, you got to say, okay, it's a risk equation, right? Looking at pros and cons and looking at and clearly articulating what the options are and really laying that out to the business. Terry wasn't saying just do it unsecurely. She didn't want to get hacked. She didn't want war driving. But clearly we put a whole bunch of protections in place. I tell people come to the business with options. I say gold, silver, bronze. It could be platinum. There could be tin in there. Maybe 5 options. But give options to the management and tell them these are the trade-offs. But you're probably not the first person in the world. Maybe you are, but probably not doing whatever it is you're doing. So, go out, do your homework, do the research, come up with options, and then walk through those options with the business area. And again, it doesn't, Wi-Fi's kind of old news to many people, right. But maybe your company's talking about BYOD, maybe it's IoT, maybe it's autonomous vehicles, maybe it's drones, maybe it's, who knows, artificial intelligence, and saying, well, that's not secure. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's something, I'm not saying you never use the veto option. Another analogy I use is people call us the cyber police. And police has a connotation for a lot of people. Nobody wants to see that red light being pulled over, getting speeding tickets, right? At the same time, if your house is getting robbed or something bad's happening in your neighborhood and you call 911, you want them there right now, right? So, clearly I'm not saying you never need to, stop things, but be very careful as a CISO when you want to shut down a project or you want to shut down whatever business function you're thinking you need to shut down. I think that's a real risk for a real challenge for a lot of young CISOs, especially. They want to come in and start shutting stuff down.
Yeah, and I think it used to be that you said no until you could figure out how to make it secure, right? And I think I think you're dead on that changing has to think to it's a yes, and these are the other parameters around that. So how do you communicate that risk to the organization when they want to go a certain direction and you don't want to shut it down? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, first of all, it starts with the relationships. I think it's so important. I tell CISOs, I tell security leaders, and I tell technology leaders. I mentor quite a few CISOs and CTOs as well, and CIOs, a few CIOs that are from smaller governments. But, don't just hang out with the security pros. I think we're all going to be evaluated kind of a 360 thing. It's your relationships with your management above, your staff below, your peers on, and your customers, and then the vendor partner. So it's really 5 areas of really having relationships, and do lunch, talk to them, understand them. Starts off with, in the same way, we have relationships with our kids, and hopefully it's not always like, don't do this and do that. And it's not just the do's and don'ts. I love playing sports with them and going and having fun, doing vacations. You say, well, what's that have to do with CISOs? Well, in the business world, what's your relationship like with those business partners? I mean, if you're on the board, certainly. If you're, but also if you're just peers, how are you relating to them? And what are their challenges? Not just the security challenges from a personal perspective, from a business perspective, getting to know them, and that to me is is the biggest piece of it. Certainly, there's ways you can articulate it. We can talk about how to present your business case in an executive board meeting, how to do that at a staff meeting, how in the appropriate ways and inappropriate ways to, I always say, just like we do with our kids, you want to praise in public and discipline in private. You don't want to necessarily be airing your dirty laundry out in front of people. So there are lots of articles and ways you can articulate that. I also would say, do your homework. We talked about that earlier. Who else is doing whatever you want to do? Who's done it before you? Look at case studies. Ask your vendor partners. You say, this is going to change the world, this new product. We're just out on the RSA floor, hundreds, thousands of companies down there all saying they've got the secret sauce. But I mean, the key, and there's so many different ways you can do this, but getting case studies, looking at who's doing it successfully, modeling the, whatever business you're in, whatever stovepipe, say stovepipe, whatever industry, whether it's automotive or you're in government or you're in transportation or you're in banking, finance, who's doing it well and modeling yourself after them. And having that, I think that speaks a lot to executives, to CXOs, whether it be CEO, CFO, is if you can say, here's what this organization did, here's how they did it, and building those relationships with other CISOs like you, Todd. What you've done with this book, these stories are powerful. I mean, they're really powerful, and but being able to have those examples. And look at the road, the road less traveled, look at how they did it, follow the yellow brick road. If you know something works, do it. Not saying everybody's going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be exactly the same as your other, other governments or other banks or whatever. But do your homework, have the relationships, certainly communicate it well at the appropriate times. I think those are 3 areas, and we could say a lot more about that. I know there are whole books on how to brief the board and how to build a risk case. People could talk about, doing risk assessments, knowing where your weaknesses are. There's lots of other things you can do, but I think those are some good tips.
Yeah. Well, this has been excellent, Dan. I love your tips there. I think they're great advice for our listeners, and it just. I think it's just so important that the CISO be seen as that partner within the business. Absolutely. And I think you just clearly demonstrated how important that is. So thanks much for your time. It's been a pleasure working with you. And we have more on the Cybersecurity Collaborative website.
Thank you so much for having me, Todd. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.